I'm Robin Miller-Brecker.
And I'm Karen Lenzer. Welcome to Seeking Center, the podcast.
Join us each week as we have the conversations and weed through the spiritual and holistic clutter for you. We'll boil it down to what you need to know now.
We're all about total wellness, which to us means building a healthy life on a physical, mental, and spiritual level. We'll talk to the trailblazers who will introduce you to the practices, products, and experiences that may be just what you need to hear about to transform your life.
If you're listening to this, it's no accident. Think of this as your seeking center and your place to seek your center. And for even more mega inspo, sign up for Seeking Center, the newsletter at seekingcenter.app. We are beyond honored and excited to introduce you to Kat B. She is best known as a spiritual medium and intuitive guide. However, she has so much to offer. It actually made me almost fall over when I realized how much she can help heal and transform your life. Let me list a few of her abilities. Kat is also a Reiki healer, clinical hypnotherapist, cognitive behavioral psychotherapist, past life regressionist, tarot and angel card reader, connection coach, therapist, meditation teacher. There's more. And she has a tremendous sense of humor. While she takes you and the sacred work seriously, her welcoming energy is full of wit and charm, and she makes you feel comfortable as you navigate these transformative experiences. I had a mediumship reading with Kat, and I can tell you firsthand, her connection with spirit is crystal clear and undeniable. Her translation from the spirit world to me was spot on. I was in awe of the messages and validations that came through one after another. Kat's focus for every session is to help guide you closer to healing, personal growth, transformation, and progression. She will always create a safe space full of love, compassion, and hope. As she says, she only wants to touch love so it can transform you. You have to hear her journey into this work. It is absolutely captivating. We'll be covering a lot of ground during this conversation, including signs, synchronicities, and soul planning in your own life. Let's get talking. Hi, Kat.
Lovely to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's such a privilege.
Oh, and we just love seeing you. I'm meeting you for the first time. I just have to say, you're glowing and you're smiling and you're just in this beautiful energy. So thank you for being here with us.
It's a pleasure. It's so nice to see you and to speak to you on the podcast today.
And we should note that Kat is in London, and we are so grateful that you take the time, especially later in your day, to do this.
That's so sweet of you. It's a pleasure.
So tell us about your journey into mediumship. It really is such a fascinating journey and story, and I know your grandfather is a part of it.
My route to mediumship's not a conventional one. I had no idea I was going to be a medium. Let me put that on the table straight away. I was training to be a buyer, and I went on to be a leader in the UK fashion industry. I was 10 years at leadership level working for the UK fashion industry, and I was loving it. I really enjoyed it. But my grandfather was a really profound influence on me. He was a bit of a hero of mine. He was a very down-to-earth man, a constant gardener. He loved Mother Earth. He'd grown up on a farm, a beautiful, sensitive soul, but he'd been profoundly affected in his life by trauma in his early days when he lost his father connected to the war and quite a few of his friends. And so he was profoundly grateful as a person and very humble and always had time for people. Even if he saw a child in the street, if he felt that that child had nothing, he'd want to give them like money or coins to get sweets and stuff. And that might just make their day. He was all about joy, and sometimes he would embarrass me and he'd break out into song. I mean, he was just a very funny, slapstick kind of guy. And we had a really profound experience. He wasn't a religious man because he'd lost his faith in God after losing his father and some of his friends, but he would honour the dead. And it would often be when nobody else was in the church, when we would sit there and I'd say to him, "What are we doing here?" And he'd say, "I've come to pay my respects to the dead. I just want to talk to my friends and my father." And I'd say to him, "Grandad, does anybody ever talk back?" And he'd go, "No, but that's not the point of being here." And I'd start tugging at him, and I was only a small child, and I'd be like, "Oh, come on, Grandad, let's go see the horses in the field behind. Come on, let's go see the horses. You've done your talking." Eventually he'd give in and he'd followed me out of the church, rolling his eyes. But 6 weeks before my grandfather transitioned, I say transitioned, died. I see death as one day in the moment of history. He transitioned to the other side. He burst out crying 6 weeks before he transitioned, and he said to me, "I'm never going to see you again alive." And I said, "Oh, don't be so ridiculous, Grandad. You're going to see me in 6 weeks' time. I'm only going to university for a half a term. I'll literally be back. In fact, I tell you what, I'll come back a day early. And he was adamant, no, I'm never going to see you again. And he was crying and bawling, and I tried to use my sense of humour as I do. And I was like, I tell you what, Grandad, if there is an afterlife and you do transition before I get back, even though I'm going to come back a day early and I'm going to catch you, then send me a sign. Send me a sign, because we're never going to be disconnected. We're always going to be connected. And sure enough, I moved my date from university a day forward to come back home, and he died the afternoon of the day before. And that was my first insight to what the hell is going on. How did he know? That's what we call a precognitive sign, or some people call it a shared death experience, where somebody talks about their transition prior to the transitioning. I know in readings sometimes I've had children that have said to me, but I told my mum I was going to go out in a car accident and I was going to go out sideways with a smile on my face. I told my mum what to wear to my funeral. And you hear some really random things and you think, am I really hearing this? Am I really understanding what they're saying to me? And that was my first insight. And it got even more bizarre on the run up to the funeral. So the day before we buried my grandfather, my mum, who was the daughter-in-law of my grandma and my grandfather, my parents were divorced, and my mum was actually taking charge of the house. She was going to look after my grandma and get her to the funeral and get her dressed and everything. And so my sister's 12 years older than me, and she was put in charge of driving me half an hour from the town that we lived in to the funeral. Mum didn't want us to stay at the house. She thought that was a little bit morbid, or didn't want us more upset than we already were. But that night, it was very interesting. My mum was always a bit nervous of the spirit world. She's always been not a non-believer. I don't know what her thoughts are on it. It wasn't a conversation we'd ever had. But that night, she was laying in the bed in the room behind my grandma's room, and she saw lights. She saw lights bouncing off the wall, and she thought she was dreaming at first. And so she really stressed, opened her eyes, and the room was full of lights. So she got scared and she closed her eyes, and she was hiding behind the duvet, not wanting to get out of bed. And when she closed her eyes, the lights got brighter, and then she could hear voices, and she was adamant that the voice was my grandfather's voice talking to my grandma. Now, we maybe wouldn't have believed my grandma because she'd been diagnosed as having the first stages of Alzheimer's just the week before. And it was really fascinating because my grandma in front of me then said to my mum the next day, Joan, did you see the lights? And my mum didn't really know what to say because she was like, yes, I did. And she said, Grandad came back last night. Did you hear him? And my mum was like, yes, I did. And he said, what we're burying is just the shell and that the soul lives on, and not to worry about the funeral today and not to be scared or panic. And so here I was again. I was like, hang on a minute. He tells me 6 weeks before he dies that he's dying, and now he's coming back from the dead. Like, what? My world in a week has kind of changed. And being the 21-year-old that I am, and I'm not that I'm rude or unloving to my grandma, but I'm like, hang on a minute. If he was going to come and see anybody, why didn't he come and see me? Where's my sign? Where's my conversation? Why didn't he come and say hello to me? Maybe I was a sleeper. I was a bit gutted. I couldn't understand what was going on. So my mum, to shut me up, was really interesting. My mum had found one of the medals from the war of my grandfather's, and it had the Archangel Michael on it. And so she pushed this gold medal into my hand, and it worked in a way because I took the medal. I didn't really think anything of it. I didn't really believe in angels or anything like that. I wasn't religious myself. But because of the sentimentality that it was the war medal that had been lost, that was connected to the great-grandfather that had died, I put a white ribbon on it and I tied it to my bedpost, and unknowingly or unwittingly to me, perhaps then invoked the spirit world because I put my faith in this image, if you will, of the Archangel Michael. And I always thought it said, I will protect you on the back of the coin. So I was like, oh, that's something nice to sentimentally hold on to. So years later, when I would have what I call my awakening, it was very profound to me that then I started having experiences connected to this effigy or archetype, if you will, of the Archangel Michael. So the whole thing comes full circle. But my grandfather was such a loving force in my life. That connection was never going to be lost. Here's the thing thing that I really want to share with the listeners and with yourselves is that some people say to me, I never get signs. My loved one's transitioned. I didn't get signs from my grandfather for 11 years. And we talk about 11 being this connected number. It really was 11 years before I really got the sign. But when I got it, it was a massive one. And so I feel profoundly grateful that, and I want to say to people, sometimes there is divine timing or there is divine order in things. You might want or wish. I was very logical left brain thinking. I was working my way up to a leadership role in industry. To me, it was all a little bit much to take in, but it did open up the doorway and maybe save my life later when I would have a diving accident by having this insight that maybe that there is something else out there. And the other sort of thing within my own soul plan is my sister lost a child in pregnancy before she went on to have 2 amazing children. And my mum took her to see a medium and it transformed my sister's life. And I was nagging my mum, what is this? How can this person talk to somebody that's transitioned? I desperately wanted to hear from my grandfather. I wanted to know that he was alive. And the stuff that had been said to my sister was so precisely, it was so evidential. They even told her about the fact she'd just bought a house and she actually put a piece of sellotape, this is really sad, there was a piece of wallpaper that was peeling off the wall behind the sink in the kitchen, and she'd actually just sellotaped it down thinking, I'm going to redecorate it, but I can't have that peeling off. And the woman brought it up in the reading saying, I know that you sellotaped a piece of wallpaper down, that you've got to tile at the back of that sink. I mean, you just can't make that stuff up. This was before the days of social media anyway, but you were never going to find that information. It was just too personal. So that was my first insight into spiritual, or wanting to be a seeker of the truth and wanting to understand more. It was later when I had a diving accident that really everything spun off.
So then what happened with the diving accident that caused you to have what I guess we would call a spiritual awakening?
Yeah, so I was going on holiday. I just got engaged and I was really excited, and we were going on holiday, and we always had this thing that we would do new things or take ourselves out of our comfort zone on holiday. So whether it was tennis or diving, or we did kickboxing once, we tried different things. This was before we had our daughter. And so on this trip, it was my turn to choose something. And I was like, let's go diving. And why somebody who's a bit nervous underwater wants to go diving, I have no idea. But I did quite well in the swimming pool. I did quite well the first day out at sea. But day 2 out at sea, the weather conditions changed. And it's very interesting. I didn't want to get in the water the day of the diving accident. The weather looked like a storm was coming in, and it was. The weather was completely changing and very quickly. And I'd been a lifeguard in a former guise on the beach in my hometown, and I was nervous because we lost a person at sea every year, often going in after an animal or a dog. So I was very cautious around water. I understood the dangers of water. I was quite a good swimmer. I wouldn't say I'm the best in the world or anything, but I could capably manage myself. And the day of this incident, I didn't want to get in the water. And I kept saying, no, I've got a fear. Something's telling me don't get in the water. And I overrode that gut intuitive instinct, partly because I felt I had to get in the water and I felt this peer pressure. But also the diving instruction was like, come on, get in the water. And so I felt awkward and I got in against my better judgment and I was uncomfortable. I had problems equalising going down. I ended up at the back. I now realise that the group was bigger than there should have been. There was children in the group. There should have been 2 instructors potentially. There was only one, and they had to be at the front with the child. And basically what happened is I somehow ended up right at the back, and this guy who was behind me came in front and his flipper hit my mask and the mask came off. And in turbulent weather conditions, I couldn't see anything. We'd gone for maybe about a mile from the actual accident scene, and all I could see is a vague light at the top of the surface. I didn't know how far I was down. I didn't know how far away I was from the boat. And I took the decision, because I couldn't see my husband, who felt really guilty about it afterwards, because he was meant to be my buddy, but he was so busy looking at everything, trying to work out what he was doing. And this guy had got in between us, and I took the decision to go, wrongly or rightly, to go to the surface. I thought that was the safe thing to do. But what I hadn't realised is the weather conditions had changed. The waves were very strong. I had actually moved or swum near rocks, and I knew that actually if I inflated the BCD, I was going to go straight into the rocks. And so I start treading water and nobody comes. And I'm there 15, 20 minutes. I start suffering overexertion. And I can see a small boat and I try to wave at this boat. And I think they think I'm just waving at them. So they just wave back. They don't realize I'm in danger. And I'm like, oh, sugar. And I can't see our boat. And so I don't know what to do. And the tanks are obviously really heavy. If I inflate the BCD, I'm straight into the rocks. And so I just keep treading water thinking it's going to be okay. But then there's this moment where my energy starts to drain and I realize there's this silence. It was like the most beautiful silence I can ever describe. It was like time stood still. There was this moment of complete and utter peace. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. And it wasn't actually my body that was telling me that I was going to die. It was this sense of peace. It was totally perfect. And I thought, oh my word, this is it. They've come for me. And I felt as if there was somebody watching me or observing me in the water, but I couldn't see anybody. And I had this moment, and then my sense of humour kicked in, and I was like, you are joking me. I have waited 8 years to get married. And you are taking me now? Are you kidding me? I was like, oh no, this is not happening on my watch. And suddenly the non-religious person suddenly turned to prayer. I had recited from youth. I'd been in a Christian school, and so I knew the Lord's Prayer. I never used it. But suddenly I found myself saying the Lord's Prayer. And what was really interesting is I saw this wave of energy. It was almost like when you get steam coming out of the kettle or something. I could see this like wave of energy coming towards me. And as I said the Lord's Prayer, what I noticed is it responded and it started to move away. But it felt like it moved back and it was watching me. And I was like, this is really weird. There's something going on. Something's responding to me and I can feel a presence here. The power of prayer is really quite an interesting thing. It retracted and it responded. And that's when I realized it was intelligent and there was something else going on. And then as I went under, the diving instructor came up. I blacked out. How she got me to the boat, I have no idea. I remember I then actually got sickness, diarrhea, all the things that you get from post-traumatic stress disorder. Your whole body evacuates everything to make you lighter. And when I came round, I was just crying and shaking. And so it was a little bit of a traumatic experience at the first, but my husband was quite wise. He got to get back on the horse. He got to get in water. He got me in water and we called the doctors and we got checked over and all those things. But I had a delayed reaction. I managed to finish the holiday. When I got back to London, the minute I got on the tube, the claustrophobia on the tube created the panic attack that then started this post-traumatic stress and shock. Shock takes a long time to come out of your body. And it started the shock coming to the surface and brought with it a wave of stuff that I'd never experienced before. But I'm profoundly grateful for it now. What came out of this traumatic situation really changed my life and I'm really grateful for it. About 6 months later, I got married. Everything went really well. And a friend of mine had gifted me some massage sessions at a local retreat. And I wasn't somebody who really pampered themselves in terms of massage or things like this. So this was quite a new experience for me. And so I'd gone through 5 of these 6 sessions that had been gifted to me. And the 6th one, the guy who was the healer that day, his car broke down. And so they said to me, do you want to wait 3 months for Philip or do you want to take the replacement? I said, I don't mind. And so I took this locum opportunity. And as I walked in the door, I thought to myself, God, you feel familiar. There was no recognition, but I'd never met this guy before. And as he started to talk, there was synchronicity started. I said something like, oh, I've just got back from India. And he said, oh, I've just got back from India. And we started this conversation. And then we started talking about family. He started talking about his family being farmers. And I said, oh, that's really weird. My grandfather was a farmer. And we just had all these little, it was like every sentence, to the point that when I went to turn over onto my stomach, I was a bit nervous. Who is this guy? He's almost like reading my mind. They used to have a lot in common with me, and yet we're complete strangers. But here's the thing. When I turn over, he says to me, you've got a blockage of energy in your lower back. I said, sorry. He said, you've got a blockage of energy in your lower back. You've had an accident. I said, I have. But I haven't told anybody here. How do you know? He says, you had a diving accident. I said, okay, that's pretty precise. And I was like, how do you know I've had a diving accident? Do I have like a label that says diving accident? Seriously? And he said, I can see it. I said, what do you mean you can see it? He said, I can feel it. I said, feel it where? He said, look, because we're in a corporate environment, I shouldn't really show you this, but I'm going to show you it because I feel that if I don't, you're going to leave here without addressing this. And I'm worried that it could turn to cancer or a disease seize in the body if you don't address it. Are you okay if I show you something? And I said, sure. Being a bit naive, didn't really understand. So he asked me to lay down and he manipulated the energy, and he was trained in cranial osteopathy as well as massage. He manipulated some of the fluids in the neck, and then he did what I think must have been Reiki. It felt like something shot through my body, and I was like, what was that? And he said, oh, it's just the energy. And I was like, oh, who are you? What is this? And so then he asked me to sit up, and he never touched me. I really do need to emphasize, his intentions were pure gold. He never laid a finger on me. He only put his hand 10 centimeters away from my heart chakra and then moved down to the solar plexus and the sacral. And my whole body, without him doing anything, just this transference of energy, my whole body started to convulse like a snake. I had an eruption of what I believe was the Kundalini energy in the body, and it started to shoot up through the chakras. Now, at this stage, I don't have a clue about chakras. I don't know anything about Kundalini energy. I didn't know anything. And so this energy doesn't rise up instantly. It slowly starts to rise up over a period of about 2 weeks. Now, this young man was going on holiday, and he says to me, I think you might need another session, but I won't be able to treat you here. And he says, I shouldn't really do this, but I'm going to give you my details. And if you want to, I've got a studio in Angel. I could treat you there. I took his details and I nervously put myself out thinking what the hell had happened. And I was a bit starstruck. I was left the retreat that day thinking, that's an unusual experience. 2 weeks later, when this guy's coming back from holiday, my husband, who we never go out in Angel, has booked a meal in Angel the same night. And I'm like, this is really weird. So I was saying to my husband, I feel a little bit strange. I feel a little bit different. And the next day I went to yoga, and as I went to do sun salutation, suddenly I saw this vision. It was like a TV screen had been opened up, and I saw images from nature, and then a man suddenly dancing with a girl, and the two of them entwining as one. And I thought, oh, God, must have an active imagination tonight. But then the next, I was lying in bed and I was awake. It was about 2-3 in the morning, and suddenly again this screen opened out, and it looked like I was watching TV. It was like dreaming, but with your eyes open. Maybe some people would call it lucid dreaming. And I could see these Roman soldiers, and they were talking about a battle, and I saw the Bedouin 10, and I shouted out very naively again, Gabrielle, is that you? And suddenly I had, no, not Gabrielle. My name is Michael. 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 I've come to cut the cord. And I was like, at which point I got a pain in my stomach. I fell forward and I started to shake. And the vision just disappeared. And I was frightened. I was absolutely petrified. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know who it was. I got down on my hands and knees and I crawled into the front room. And funnily enough, the only thing that would actually slow the pain down in my stomach was actually doing sun salutations. But now I realised that those sun salutations started moving the energy. And so as the energy started to increasingly rise, it started to blast through all the chakras. And I took myself into the doctors thinking, I've got to sign myself off sick. I'm going crazy. I'm seeing things, I'm hearing things that other people aren't experiencing. But here's the thing. Spirit were very clever. They put the right people around me, and they put evidential information around me. So when this energy really went up to the sort of crown chakra, and I started to have really profound experiences and feel energy like I've never really experienced before, there was like knowledge coming down in real sort of big, it was like downloads of information. The internet had only just come out really, and I would check out the information that was coming down and it would factually be correct. And I'd think, this is weird. I know nothing on this subject matter, and yet this information is coming down. And now I'm finding these articles that connect to it. Even things like cord cutting. I didn't know what cord cutting was. I looked it up on the internet and found this stuff on cord cutting. And so when this young man comes back from his holiday, I'm like, who the hell is Michael? And he says, ask him. What do you mean ask? Just ask in your head who he is. And so I asked, but a woman's voice answered, and she said, do you remember how kind you were to Michael? I was like, sorry? She said, do you remember how kind you were to Michael? And then I remembered a young man who, at the age of 13, had lost his father to suicide, and he'd had a soft spot for me, this lad, and he had walked past me in the corridor at school, and I'd said, stopped him, I didn't know him. And I said, I understand that you've lost your father, and this is my address, and if you ever need somebody to talk to, come find me. I don't want you to think there's anything in it. It's very innocent, but if you need somebody to talk to, or you you need a hug? This is where I live. Unbeknown to me, that boy turned up on my doorstep that very night. And for 2 weeks, all I did was hold him while he cried and listen to him. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, we went back to being strangers, and we didn't become friends until we were about 17 or 18 when we met through a mutual friend, and we remembered each other. But then I had these flashes of different Michaels that I'd helped throughout my life. I was like, God, you're always helping Michaels. That's a bit weird. Spirit started to really educate me that they'd been with me for a long time, and I hadn't noticed anything. Nothing to me seemed strange or abnormal or odd. But these flashes in hindsight made me realise that there's so much more going on in life than we naturally perceive. And so I experienced what's called Kundalini Stage 1, the opening of the heart, and I started having very psychic and mediumistic experiences. And it was from that point onwards that I got real amazing synchronicities. I saw my grandfather for the first time in the spirit world, looked as physical as you and I. It was only for a short moment that I saw him, and he told me it was the harvest time and I needed to go back to the farm, and so he gave me directions and things that he wanted to do. And so over a 9-day period I took this leap of faith and I did what he asked me to do, and each day that I got something right or I did what he asked me to do, I got rewarded. And at the end of the 9th day I really had this amazing experience where I went back to the farm that he had grown up on, which I never knew where it really was, and I started having these evidential experiences that would then lead me to contact the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain. I looked them up on the internet and I asked to see 2 mediums. I'm still questioning the whole thing, and this gentleman that I see, he gives me this incredible reading. So the story ends where my granddad gave me these messages. I ended up in a town I've never been to before, and I knew I was looking for black and white postcards, and I knew that the postcard would have a connection to the name Sutcliffe, and that the image would have something to do with my family. And my granddad keeps saying the word hay bale. So we go to this town, I see his initials on a suitcase, I look outside of the window and I see this postcard and it's got hay bale on it. I turn it over and it says Frank Meadow, who's the photographer, and it's got my great grandfather's name on this postcard. And so my postcards exist. I said to my mum, we've got to go to this town. He's telling me to go to this town, and it turns out there's an art gallery, and 20% of the photographs in this art gallery are photographs of my family that we never knew existed. So I go with these postcards to see the medium. Never tell them anything about the postcards. I've got these postcards in my bag. And the guy says, have you got the black and white postcards? Can I have the one with the bridge on it? And I gave him the one from the bridge, and he gave me the most astounding reading. And then he said, they won't tell me everything. The spirit world say they want you to meet a friend of mine, but he won't be here in London for 4 weeks. He's going to tell you the other half of this story. And I got to see the other guy, and the other guy's going, oh, I'm seeing a Michelangelo's touched by the hand of God. You had a really awakening experience, and you experienced the Archangel Michael. I started to laugh, and I was like, I don't know. I then went to learn how to close down. I was scared. I wanted to actually shut it all down. And then once I'd shut it down, I got curious. What is this? Why did this happen to me? So then I went in search of people who could open me up or teach me. And I started to hone my skill as a medium. And 15 years of researching, I never thought I was ever going to do anything with it. I thought this was just part of my self-development, my story. And then I found it was quite useful in my fashion industry world. Spirit would show me how it could be very useful in everyday life to be attuned to one's intuition or one's spirit. And so it started helping me, and I started to enjoy it that way first. And then I never realised that they were training me to go on the journey of becoming a full-time medium. And when they actually asked me to leave my full-time career, I actually thought they were joking.
When you say they, do you mean spirit asked you?
I call them spirit. There's a collective of people that work with me. And do you know what? I know some of the names, but I don't know everybody that works with me. I just trust that the people that are connecting with me are on a vibration of love, and I'll get messages or thoughts and intuition that comes into me, and I trust it because I've tested it. Factually, it's worked out. Things like the postcards, it's going to be a black and white postcard with a hay bale on it. It's going to have the name Sutcliffe on it. It's going to be connected to your family. And it's quite precise stuff. It wasn't like a voice that was telling me to jump off a cliff or anything like that. They were good messages of love. And what I found is that when I followed them, they delivered rewards or benefits that far outweighed the risk of the leap, if you will. And so life became much more fascinating. Life became easier. And so they started to teach me things. And changed my world and really developed me as a person as well as a medium. I think that's the biggest benefit of connection, actually, is understanding how I could help and serve other people and be of benefit. I actually ended up doing my first reading when one of my teachers pushed me to go and do a demonstration in a town I'd never been for, and that would turn out to be the first time I ever read for a bereaved parent. And that touched my heart, and that combined with Spirit asking me to leave my work, I decided to do a gap year. And it touched me profoundly that this man had lost 3 children under the age of 5 to a very rare disease called Lee's disease. And actually in the centre that I was reading at that day, I actually brought through his best friend and not his child. And as I went to leave, his partner tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Why is it that mediums don't ever bring through children?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "My partner's got 3 kids under the age of 5 and we've been coming to the centre for 20 odd years and they never bring through the children. They only ever bring through the best friend or the grandparent. And I just don't understand." She said, "He is profoundly affected by the loss of these children." I felt guilty. I went home that day. I felt really bad. I wrote to the centre and I said, "There was a man. This is what he looked like. I think his name was Fred. Can you contact him and tell him I will meet him? I can't come back all the way to Felixstowe. It's 2 hours away from where I live in London, but I can meet him in Essex. And I'm just about to take a gap year. I've taken a year out to serve Spirit. And Monday happens to be the first day of my new job. And how would he like to be my first client and come and meet me? I'll do the reading for free." And this man rocks up. He's suited and booted. Oh, bouquet of flowers. He was lovely. It was a gorgeous sunny day. We sat down. I was so nervous. What if I don't get these kids? What if I don't bring them through? And the first thing I said to him, I said, "I see a green bank. Does green bank mean something?" And I'm panicking. And he says, "Green bank was the hospital that my son was at in Plymouth." And I was like, "Oh, okay, all right, I think I've got him. Is his name Mark?" And he said, "He is." And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." You've got 2 girls in Spirit. And I tried to use my sense of humour. You mentioned my sense of humour at the beginning. I think sense of humour is a great thing. I looked at this guy. He was ex-military, really macho guy. I said, "You don't look like the type to have 2 butterfly tattoos on your legs." "Fred, your girls are saying you've got a butterfly for each of them on each side." I said, "No way." And he lifted up his trouser and there was the butterfly on each side and he started to cry. And I started to cry. I was like, "Oh my God, we've got them." And so we sat there for an hour and a half. And this is really the power of prayer. As I leave, my grandfather in Spirit on the way to this reading had said, "Whatever you do, if he tries to give you money, don't accept the money." This one's on the spirit world. He's waited so long to hear from his kids. He hadn't heard from his children in 40 years. And he says, "Even if he offers you the car petrol money, do not accept the money. But if he offers you coffee, go for coffee." So sure enough, the guy gets out an envelope. He tries to pay me. I said no. Then he wants to pay me for the petrol. I say no. Then he says, "Okay, can I take you for coffee?" And I go, "Yeah," thinking, what am I doing? I go, leap of faith moment. I'm thinking, I've already spent an hour and a half with him. Now I'm going to have to sit. What is this about? And he tells me his life story. He'd been on a ship with the now King of England. He'd been one of the chefs on the naval vessel that he'd been working on. And he had served his country, and he was sat there in front of me telling me this amazing story of his life. And then suddenly he turned the books on me and he said, "Are you religious?" And I said, "I'm not, Fred. I don't really know what I was doing in the centre other than that I wanted to hone my mediumship and it was a way of practicing it." I said, "But I tell you what, in my years in retail, I did used to do this thing and I call it turn left. I turn left. And suddenly Spirit would take me to this church. It was like they were testing me whether I would follow orders. And the church would either be St. Mary's or St. Michael's, but it would always be a church." At which point he suddenly got up. He dropped everything that he had. He started to get very animated and he got on his mobile phone. He rang his partner and she comes running in. She doesn't know whether the reading's gone or not, poor lady. And he says to her, "Tell her what we've done since we retired, Joan." And she says, "What do you mean, Fred?" And he said, "Tell her what we do since we retired. In the car, tell her. Because I can't tell her because she's not going to believe me." And she says, "Oh, we do this thing, Kat. We call it turn left. We turn left, and it always takes us to a church." Oh. At which point I'm like, "Oh!" And this download of information comes from the spirit world. And I went, "Oh my God, Fred, have you ever lived in Yorkshire, which is where I'm originally from?" And he says, "I have, Kat." He said, "I was a pub landlord in the 90s. And I went, "Oh my God, no way." I said, "Fred, 1995, you did this turn left thing. You did it before you met Joan. And I know exactly the town in Yorkshire you did it from. You ended up at church and it wasn't St. Mary's or St. Michael's, was it?" And he went, "No, that's right, Kat. I have a picture of the church on my phone." And I went, "You went to the church that my grandfather is buried in, the same one that I used to say to him, what are we doing here?
Oh, my
Does anybody talk to you? Does anybody listen? He went to this church and he says a prayer. You asked to speak to your children. Do you not think it's strange that in 40 years of going to all these centres, nobody ever brings through your children? And yet here we are today. You went to the church that my grandfather's buried thing. My prayer and my request to my grandfather was, send me a sign, a bloody big one. Your request was to speak to your children. So I've answered your prayer. I've been a conduit for spirit for you, and you've been a conduit for spirit for me. We've answered each other's prayer. It's been amazing. It's an amazing journey. It's a lot to take in, isn't it?
I just have to say, there needs to be a movie of your life, because I'm seeing this whole thing in my mind transpire about this person who really was not a seeker, with the exception of her grandfather's connection. And yet how you were led through your life and how you were so willing to follow the signs. Because I could see so many times along the way, I love your sense of humor so much, where you were just like, I don't think so. And yet you said at the very beginning, I did not take the conventional route to mediumship. How you understated that.
But that's the power of love. And that is the story for so many of your listeners and the people that take the spiritual journey. We don't think we're going to end up talking to a medium or connecting with spirit. But if you have the experience yourself, you realise that connection is for everyone. And being connected is different to being a medium, is somebody that serves other people, that is willing to do this to make every expression of their life about spirit. And I think many people want that connection with their loved ones, and they can gain it. And there's lots of different techniques. Sometimes one technique doesn't work, you try another. There's many different routes to connection. But when you find that route to connection, your whole life can transform. And I feel very privileged and profoundly grateful to have that experience where I've sat with people in the deepest, darkest depths of grief, and I've seen a smile come on their face for the first time. They've experienced joy, and they haven't felt guilty about experiencing joy because they remember something, or they hear a conversation, or their loved one tells them about something stupid that they did the other day, and you start to giggle. And sometimes you laugh. Spirit will use association, and they want to use a sense of humour. So you can get these lovely gestures, and you can get these lovely words that come through. And if it comforts somebody, then it's brilliant. If it doesn't work, and I really want to be honest about it, you can have 99% of readings can be amazing, and there'll be the occasional time somebody sits in front of you and you can't read for them, and it's heartbreaking. And it can happen for a number of reasons. It can happen because somebody isn't in the right space and is too vulnerable, and spirit stopping that communication because they think the person in front of you is vulnerable. They might stop it because there's fear. The person's fearful. Spirit wants to be gentle with that person. And it might be that somebody doesn't believe, and therefore no matter what you say to them, they're not going to hear or get the words or the vibration of that love because it's falling on deaf ears. Sometimes the information at the time doesn't make sense, and so people going no, and then suddenly they realise, oh no, it's yes. Sometimes the medium's falling ill. I remember one time I was coming down with the flu, I didn't know it, I couldn't read for this guy, and I was like, God, this is really weird. I had a lovely day of readings yesterday, and now I'm sat here, I felt embarrassed. And I realised as I've journeyed on and got more experience that it's a normal part of it, that there is defined timing to some things, and that you can't make things happen. You have to trust. And what people don't realise is sometimes you're calibrating the person living's energy as well as the spirit world. And often the spirit world have rocked up and they're ready. But I can't calibrate or change the frequency of the person sitting in front of me, and therefore I can't form the connection that I need to sustain that connection of love, to get the information in. So at times like that, I might recognise a colleague, or maybe they just need a different medium and a different person on a different day with a different frequency or vibration. I really do believe that energy will follow you wherever you need. But there are times, one of the most profound things that I had experienced was a lady in New York. 10 minutes before her reading, I get the worst migraine I've ever experienced. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I feel sick. I'm actually not going to be able to read for you this evening. And you feel really guilty as well, because these people waited for you. You're panicking even though you can't do anything about it. Now, what's really interesting here is the next day, completely out of the blue, her mum, who had been very healthy, died of a heart attack. And I'd rearranged the appointment for the following Monday, and her mother was the first person through. And so you have to say to yourself, there's defined timing. The spirit world knew that the greatest need was a week later. And so not to waste the reading, if you will, they delayed it or postponed it by making me feel ill. That's all part of the creativity and the intelligence that you're working with.
I just want to point out two things. One is that evidential part, which is a word that you've mentioned, that there's evidential medium mediumship. And what I find with your readings is it's a combination of evidential, of validations of certain things that there is no way that you could know certain things, yet you do.
Yes, evidence means different things to different people. So some people come with the expectations that it's going to be names, dates, and lists, and some people will give you all of that stuff. I remember a guy that came to me and he was quite skeptical, and his Catholic father, the priest from his local church, came in from the spirit world, and he named his 8 siblings in chronological order and told him the relationship that he had to each one of them. And still, that man did not believe. And so I was saying to him, you can come more often. I never get names as frequently as this in this kind of detail. But the next person that came on didn't get a single name. But the evidence came through might have been the gestures that their loved one did, might be the way that they folded their arms, or it might have been that they'd seen them do, might be something quite mundane like fixing a pipe underneath a sink. Oh, you had a burst pipe yesterday. I really want to say to people, some people go in with an expectation and they get very frustrated when it's not packaged the way that they want it to be, or maybe the words aren't what they expect to hear. I remember one lady that came to me, I said something to her and she said, no, that's not my mum. And then she reworded the exact same sentence that I'd given, but in a different grammar. And I said, but you were saying the same thing. But the wording that I used didn't correspond or resonate with her. And so I realised that I was not going to be able to read for her because every sentence that I said was factually correct, but it didn't resonate. So it's fascinating. And so I think the most important thing for anybody going into a mediumship reading is, first of all, go to a recommended medium, somebody that has been tested out. Look for a certified medium if you can. I've been blind tested, and it's not going to guarantee you a brilliant reading, but it's going to reduce the possibilities of a bad one. And then you really then want to go in with an open mind, with a loving heart. If you go in too structured and demanding a certain thing, you might come away disappointed.
Yeah. What I wanted to point out is, to me, it's the way that you translate that syncs with me, as well as that validation and evidence that syncs. And then in addition to all of that, you're giving guidance and messages that also have landed with me. I know that, and I've landed with others that I've recommended you to. So to me, it is that combination. And with other mediums that I know Karen and I have spoken to, it's that same combination of the validation, the way they translate, as well as the guidance and messages that come through. There is a comfort and an ease that you give that I know others that we recommend. I think what's important when you say, Karen.
Yeah. And I think the evidential expectation that people have can maybe sometimes mislead them as well, because they could come in really expecting, like you were saying earlier, Kat, like getting a specific message or hearing from a certain person, and then they don't hear that. And then they think you haven't connected. And I love that you said earlier, there can be things within that person as well. It can be fear. It could be overwhelming sadness that can prevent them from getting the messages that they need.
What I love about Fred's story, he kept trying, and he was so open-minded that one day it was going to happen. But also I think Spirit made it not happen in the way that he wanted it to happen, because we were meant to have that meeting. That meeting profoundly changed my life. That was the meeting that made me leave the fashion industry and say, this is a change of career and a change of life. And for him, I mean, it bonded us as friends as well, and we stay in touch. We've made a connection with one another. I think Spirit, that's part of what I want to say about connection as well. It's not just about connection to the spirit world, it's about connection to people. It's lovely to have people in spirit, but if the connection doesn't work for you in life and change something here or address something here or connect you with somebody here, then there's a lack of purpose or direction. I find that when mediumship's really good, it does both.
And I think what you do is you remind people that their loved ones are always near. They're always here. They're still around.
People think they're out in the stars or the cosmos. They're not. They're right here.
Exactly. And I think that's the affirmation that so many are looking for, especially the ones that are really deeply grieving. They want to know that. And you're the conduit of that. And I think one of the other things that you touched on, because I just love your story so much, because you didn't grow up one day and go, I'm going to be a medium when I grow up. You had this very traditional life. And yet it feels like one of the key things when you talk about your traumatic accident, which I could barely listen to, but that you were always looking for signs along the way. You were open to any of the signs that people gave to you. And I think for those who are listening, who may be looking for signs from their loved ones, who may be wanting to try a little mediumship on their own, doesn't it start with that? Looking for signs, listening to your intuitive voice.
The story with Fred that's really important is sometimes another person, another human being can be that conduit for spirit. I can't tell you the amount of times that kids that I work with in the spirit world have come through my daughter who is clueless to the fact that she's mediumistically picking up with them. You don't have to be a medium for spirit to blend their consciousness or harmonise with you. Sometimes words will just come out of your mouth that are influencing you. Think, oh, that's strange, I would never normally say that. But my daughter's done all sorts of things. When she was 3, she drew a picture, for instance, and she said to me, Mummy, what's the light that comes through my bedroom window on a night? I was like, oh, it's the moonlight. And she said, no, I know what the moonlight is. Oh, the stars. You mean the stars? No, I know what the stars are. Oh my God, what am I going to say? So I turned away and I thought, just take me out of the room, do something else. Maybe she'll change the topic. She didn't. She came back with this picture and she said, you're not looking at my picture. I know what the moonlight is. I know what the stars are. What's this like? And then when I didn't respond, she changed her frame, and it was her gesture and the way that she operated. I was very clear that there was a different energy in the room, and suddenly she went, okay, who's the boy that died before he was 30 that sings me Rockabye Baby before I go to sleep, and when he's finished he goes to the room where you meditate, and he said to do this if you didn't believe him.
Wait, I just have to tell everybody that you just made like this certain gestures with your arms because they can't see you, which okay, so very specific.
Across the arms, across the body. And that really threw me because when I was pregnant with Ava, because I'd lost children in pregnancy before, and so that's why I've got such a great empathy with parents who've lost children. I had said to Ian, my best friend who died in a motorbike accident, whatever you do, I need you to be her godfather in spirit, and will you watch over her? And I never really thought any more of it. And I feel that this was his way of saying, I heard you, I'm listening, I'm doing exactly what you said, I'm here. And I went out of the room, tears were streaming down my face. I was like, oh my God, he really is here. I waited 3 years for that sign. I had just thrown it out there. So I say to people, be patient as well. I waited 11 years for my granddad. I waited 3 years for Ian to confirm that he was watching over Ava. So I put it out there that maybe there's something else going on. Maybe we're all conduits to spirit. Maybe the signs can come through different people. Maybe you ask your loved one to tell you something about information and somebody starts a conversation with you at the bus stop or on the plane and it ends up being relevant because it's the information that you wanted, or you suddenly feel propelled to go into a bookshop that you've never been into, go to a certain shelf and pick up a certain book, and there on the page is the information that you've been looking for 6 months. Spirit can work in many different ways, and you don't have to be mediumistic. You just have to be open to love, to receiving love. That's the magic of spirit.
Wow. And we've talked now about signs, and you mentioned synchronicity. I know another subject that we talked about before was soul planning. Can you talk a bit about that?
Interesting one, isn't it? So when I came from England and I started working in America, people started talking about soul planning. I thought, nobody's talking to me about in mediumship school about soul planning. What they're talking about. When people started talking about soul planning and that the whole life has got these connections, then I started to think, oh, that sounds a bit odd. The idea that we haven't got free will and that everything's already planned or already perceived, so we can't change anything. I thought that was particularly frightening. So I didn't really know what to think of it. And this lady heard that, a really good friend of mine now actually, but at the time I didn't know, a girl called Sarah Robble. She wrote a book about soul planning, and she'd heard that as a medium working in the States online, and that I didn't believe in it. So she contacted me and asked if she could speak to me. And the kids of the spirit world, they're going to... And so the kids of the spirit world thought, okay, let's throw it at her. So it started with Sarah contacting me, and she started questioning me and saying, why don't you think this? I know it's this way. And she started educating me. And so then I thought, I really need to talk to Robert Schwartz. This is a true story. I don't know if I've even shared this with Robert, but I said to myself, I really need to talk to Robert Schwartz. He's the person that really has written all these amazing books about soul planning. And suddenly, I kid you not, ping went my inbox and an email came from Robert Schwartz. I thought, it can't be the Robert Schwartz. Robert Schwartz has contacted me. And funnily enough, Robert and I share a friend in common, which I didn't know. And that friend had said, you really need to speak to Kat. And so that day that I was there thinking, I really need to speak to Robert Schwartz, Robert Schwartz contacted me. I ended up with him for Helping Parents Heal, and it was one of the most fantastic interviews. It was one of the most fantastic conversations I ever had on suicide and healing grief after suicide I've ever had. He's got a really amazing perspective on life. And he's really well researched. He's a very left brain thinker. And I started reading his books. I started questioning him. But I still want evidence in my own life. So Robert said, "I tell you what, I'll gift you a session to my workshop for the support and help that you've given me." And I went along, and he said, "Go look back at your life and look at the key milestones in your life." And when I did, I nearly fell off my chair, because you've got the first reading my sister ever has is for a child that's been lost to the spirit world. I've got my grandfather and all his precognitive signs. I worked as a lifeguard. I worked with lost children. Do you believe it? I was the first aid officer on the beach for lost children. And I used to have to reconnect the parents with the child. What do I do in the spirit world? I reconnect parents with their child in spirit. And so I started looking at things, and I was like, oh my word, we do have free will. We can evolve things. I think we re-strategize. But we are a soul group that have agreed to do certain things. And if you look back at the milestones of your life, you'll recognize certain things. And I certainly look back at mine, and the presentation that I gave at Helping Parents Heal conference, I think really validates or shows some of the evidence that I collated. It took me a long time to collate the information, but to show the visual information and how I got certain information about certain people through the signs and synchronicities that they gave me. It's really amazing, and you don't know if it's a course of miracles. I just think it's the profound power of love, and I'm quite amazed by it. So yeah, colourful life. Spirit world is the new black. It's all happening. It changes your life and the way that you see the world forever.
Yes, completely. And I also want to, anyone that's listening, you talked about Robert Schwartz, and actually Karen and I have had Robert Schwartz on this podcast. So for anybody who hasn't heard that one, make sure to listen, because he does talk about all types of soul planning. I think different people will resonate with different stories, and he talks about suicide in there too.
I love Robert, and I used to be the affiliate leader for Helping Parents Heal in the UK, and I used to help the American group. One of the main things that I've found is the amount of parents and widows actually I've come across, that Robert's very humble man. He doesn't realise how many people he's helped heal, or his work has prevented people from taking suicide themselves. So when you lose a child, you want to go over to the spirit world yourself. It's an awful experience. And yet when you realise it's part of a soul plan or a bigger picture, or there's a purpose in certain things that happen in life, I'm really profoundly grateful for Robert. He's changed my vision of the world. And then the kids have given me evidence that some of the things that he's expressed, and I could be here all day with some of the amazing stories that the spirit world, I've got an amazing one that I really do want to share on another occasion. I won't do it today. That they gave me as evidence. If you really want to understand soul planning, ask the spirit world to show you in your own world in a form that you understand. I have very different experiences to Robert, but I found his work has helped and healed so many people. And I'm extremely grateful for the friendship that I have with him, and I'm extremely grateful for the education he gave me. I found his workshop, if you do get the opportunity to go to his workshops, they are amazing, and his books are fabulous. And so that is important to realise, that there are different forms to healing, there are different pathways to healing, there's different information. And what I love about the soul planning stuff, sometimes we have to adapt or change our points of views when we're challenged to do so with evidence. I really didn't believe in it. I do profoundly believe in it now. And it is interesting, when you move to spirituality and you start to receive this love or these insights, you open up to, it really challenges everything. Spirit world will direct you to quantum physics one day, a religion another day, an alternative book. You're absorbing everything.
Yeah. And I just want to bring up it's a big, for I think Karen and I, it's a validating soul planning time for us, which for those listening, for Karen and I, we've talked about this on our podcast before. We knew we were supposed to work together. When Karen sent me a presentation, I went to download on my computer, and the name of the file of that presentation was my father's birthday, who had died many years earlier. And it was 1117 _ 2015. 1117 are my guiding numbers in life. And because the subject of the presentation and the reason she'd sent it, I knew she was the person I was supposed to work with for my life.
You make a decision that would, in normal life, would take you years to work out, is this the right person? You make it on the snap of it.
But yes, that's what I just wanted to point that out. It comes in all these different ways, and it could be as simple yet as profound as that, and as quick as that.
Yeah.
And also to the other extreme, my mom, people who listen know that she wrote a book because my sister passed away from suicide. And
Brought up suicide.
From suicide. And she had spent a couple of years prior writing letters to her mother, who had passed away, to try to heal their relationship after she died. There was a lot of loose ends, and found tremendous healing just from that back and forth of meditating, writing a letter to her, and then just taking back whatever came and putting it down on paper. And so she utilized the same technique with my sister when she passed, and was able to write a book on it and then teach other people how to do it so that they too could have those same kind of connections with their loved ones who passed. So back to was it soul planning? Perhaps not to that degree, but that experience of wanting to learn that lesson and teach others, I think, was a soul contract between my sister and my grandmother and my mother. And it helps you heal through it, and in turn help my mother heal other people.
Oh, it's so beautiful, Karen. So beautiful.
And I think we all have our paths into this spiritual work if we're open to it. And thank goodness you were. Again, that experience in the water, that tied to your grandfather, all of those pieces could be looked at as soul connections, contracts that you made before you came. But you could have overlooked them, right? It's about looking for the signs and then being open to the teachings that they can offer.
Sometimes it's the names or synchronicities that well up, or sometimes it'll be something that somebody does, or a drama will start and suddenly catches your attention, and you think spirit have caused that diversion to get your attention, to make you look at something a little bit more deeper. So you can feel into lots of different things. Your intuition will guide you. But I think it's fabulous what you're doing, and I think it's fabulous that you've all had those experiences yourself, because I think the more that I speak to people, I thought I was the only one having these crazy experiences. Then I rock up at Helping Parents Heal, and I'm like, there's 20,000 people having these experiences. I'm not so crazy or unreal as I think I am. There's loads. We just don't talk about it.
But you create this community because you speak of them. And that's what Robin and I are trying to do all the time, is figure out ways that we can create this environment where we don't feel like weirdos. We can really connect with each other and realize that all this is on purpose. It's not random. And the joy that comes with that feeling of knowing there's more to this than we see. There's more to life than tragedy and losing people that we love. It's all on purpose if we can look for it.
That's amazing. Oh, I love that. It's a joy to be here. I've really enjoyed it.
Kat, thank you. And I know there's so much more. And so we really will have to talk to you again, because there's even more that you offer. And I really encourage people to go to your website, Kat, KAT b.com, to see all of your offerings. And you have connection circles, you have all different types of sessions and offerings, mediumship and beyond, all types of healing experiences, because you really have dedicated your life to helping people heal and move on within this world and connecting them to spirit world and to themselves.
I think when you go through trauma yourself, and I think there's a soul planning thing. The diving accident wasn't really about the diving accident. It's about learning all the modalities of healing that would help somebody who's suffering with grief. People who lose people to cancer and suicide, they have post-traumatic stress, they have experiences. So having all these skills or things that you've learned for yourself and maybe done as you thought as self-development, and then realizing that you can apply those. Actually, somebody rocks up and they think they're here for a reading, but you realize that actually what they need is they've got insomnia and they haven't slept for the last 5 years. I can help you with that. And then they start sleeping and they feel better, and they're like, oh God, isn't that weird? I came for a reading, but I ended up with a hypnosis session, and that hypnosis session changed my life. I never knew hypnosis could do that. It's wonderful. And so, yeah, having your fingers and thumbs in a few different pies is a good thing, because it means that you can bespoke what your service to the person that's in front of you, and that's helpful.
Thank you for taking that year off to serve spirit. I love that. You said that.
Being here 5 or 6 years later is a bit of a crazy thing. I didn't ever go back to my fashion world. It's a bit mad.
I think you're doing more for the world.
I have to agree wholeheartedly. We are so grateful to be connected, and we really thank you. And we can't wait to do this again.
All the best. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye, Kat. Hey!